The Galactic Concord had been watching Earth for a very long time. Their scientists had studied the blue planet from safe distances, and their reports were always the same. Earth was dangerous. Earth was hostile. Earth was the kind of world where only monsters could survive. They had given it a simple label and moved on. Class 7 Death World. Do not approach. Do not contact. Leave it alone. But Ambassador of the species believed this was a mistake. He was old by standards, with translucent skin that shimmered like crystal and eyes that had seen 100 worlds join the conquered. He had brought peace to warring planets. He had convinced predator species to sit at tables with prey species. He believed that all intelligent life could be reasoned with, even the strange bipeds of Earth. His ship, the Serenity's Promise, carried a crew of 40 diplomats and scientists. They were the best that had to offer. They had prepared for months, learning human languages and studying human culture through intercepted radio signals. They believed they understood these creatures. They were wrong. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere on a warm spring afternoon. Below them, the land was green and gold, covered in what humans called farms. Found it beautiful in a wild sort of way. The Serenity's Promise landed softly in an open field, and they waited inside, watching through their viewing screens. Humans began to gather almost immediately. They came in vehicles, on foot, and eventually in military machines that hovered above the ground. Expected panic. He expected worship. He expected weapons to be raised and threats to be shouted. Instead, the humans simply stood there, watching the ship with calm curiosity. Lieutenant Daniel Hart was among the first military personnel to arrive. He was a man in his early 30s with short brown hair and steady hands. He had served in conflicts that they could not imagine, wars fought against other humans with weapons that could level cities. An alien ship landing in Kansas was strange, certainly, but Daniel had seen stranger things in his time. When they finally emerged from their vessel, Daniel simply walked forward and nodded. His voice was calm and measured when he spoke. "Welcome to Earth." Found this greeting deeply unsettling. His translators worked perfectly, but the words themselves seemed wrong somehow. There was no fear in the human's voice. There was no awe. There was only a quiet patience, as if the human was waiting to see what would happen next. The delegation was escorted to a government facility several hours away. They traveled in human vehicles, surrounded by human soldiers who treated them with polite professionalism. Notice that the humans never stopped watching them. Their eyes tracked every movement, cataloging and analyzing. These were not the eyes of frightened creatures. These were the eyes of predators assessing potential threats. At the facility, they met Dr. Lisa Monroe. She was a woman in her 40s with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that seemed to see everything. She introduced herself as a scientist who had spent her entire career preparing for this exact moment. Her questions were direct and unsettling. She asked about biology. She asked about their atmosphere. She asked what temperatures they found comfortable and what foods they could safely consume. Answered each question carefully, but something about her manner disturbed him. "Why do you ask these things?" he finally inquired. Lisa smiled warmly. Her teeth were white and even, and noticed that humans had quite a lot of them. "We want to make sure you are comfortable," she explained. "Earth can be harsh for visitors." That night the delegation was given comfortable quarters in the facility. They were treated well. The humans provided food that was safe for consumption and adjusted the temperature to match their preferences. Everything seemed peaceful. But one of the junior diplomats, a young male named, grew restless. He had traveled across the galaxy to see Earth, and he did not want to spend his first night staring at walls. When the human guards were not watching, he slipped outside to explore. The night air was cool and filled with strange sounds. Walked through a garden near the facility, marveling at the alien plants. He had never seen so many different species growing in one place. On Prime, ecosystems were carefully managed. Here, everything seemed to grow wild and free. He did not notice the small creatures flying through the air until it was too late. The next morning, human doctors found collapsed in the garden. His body was covered in red welts, and his breathing was shallow and labored. They rushed him inside and worked frantically to save his life, but the damage was already done. Allergic reaction, they called it. Apparently, a creature no larger than a fingertip had injected with venom. The humans called these creatures bees. They were not predators. They were not monsters. They were simply insects that made sweet substances for human consumption. Died 3 hours later. Stood in the medical bay, staring at the body of his young colleague. The human doctors had done everything they could. They had apologized repeatedly, explaining that they had not known were vulnerable to such things. They seemed genuinely sorry. But was no longer thinking about apologies. He was thinking about what Dr. Lisa Monroe had said the night before. Earth can be harsh for visitors. He had thought she was being polite. Now he understood that she had been giving them a warning. He asked to see one of these bees. A human scientist brought him a small container holding a single insect. It was tiny, fuzzy, and seemed almost harmless. Stared at it for a long time. "How many of these exist on your planet?" he asked. The scientist shrugged. "Trillions probably. They are everywhere." Felt something cold settle in his chest. Trillions of tiny creatures, each carrying venom that could kill, and the humans lived among them every day without fear. They even cultivated them for food. He thought about the classification his people had given Earth. Class 7, Death World. It had seemed accurate at the time. Now, standing in a room where one of his diplomats had been killed by an insect, began to suspect that the conquered had made a terrible mistake. Earth was not simply a death world. Earth was something far worse. And the humans who lived here, who thrived here, who walked among trillions of venomous insects without concern, were not victims of their hostile planet. They were its children. Looked at Daniel Hart, who stood quietly by the door with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning. The human met his gaze without flinching. For the first time in his long career, Ambassador of the was truly afraid. The death of the diplomat sent shockwaves through the galactic conquered. For centuries, they had avoided Earth based on distant observations and old reports. Now they needed real information. They needed to understand what kind of creatures lived on that blue planet. They needed a full biological assessment of humanity. Doctor was chosen for this mission. He was a researcher, a species known for their scientific dedication and attention to detail. His body was covered in hard plates the color of copper, and his 6 limbs allowed him to work with incredible precision. His compound eyes could see spectrums of light invisible to most species. He had studied dangerous life forms before. He had never studied anything like humans. Arrived on Earth 3 months after the first contact incident. He was given access to human volunteers who agreed to be examined and interviewed. His primary subject was a man named Brooks, a paramedic from a city called Chicago. Was 35 years old with an easy laugh and a friendly manner. He seemed completely ordinary to at first glance. Then the examinations began. The first thing noticed was a scar on his forearm. It was a pale line against his brown skin, the remains of what had clearly been a significant injury. Asked about it. Construction accident, explained casually. A piece of metal went through my arm a few years back. Consulted his medical database. A wound of that severity would have killed most conquered species within minutes. At the very least, it would have required immediate emergency treatment and months of recovery. "What did you do when this happened?" he asked. Shrugged. "I wrapped it up and finished my shift. Went to the hospital after work." Stared at him. "You continued working with a piece of metal through your arm." "The job needed finishing," said simply. This was first introduction to human endurance. Over the following weeks, he documented abilities that everything he knew about biology. Humans could function without sleep for days at a time. Their bodies could operate in temperatures that would kill most conquered species. They could lose significant amounts of blood and remain conscious. They could break bones and continue fighting. But the truly horrifying discoveries came when examined human dietary habits. He observed humans consuming a substance called capsaicin. His scanners identified it as a chemical weapon, a compound designed by plants to prevent creatures from eating them. It caused pain. It caused burning sensations. It triggered defensive responses in almost every species that encountered it. Humans put it on their food for flavor. Introduced to something called hot sauce, he poured the red liquid on his meal and ate it with obvious enjoyment while watched in disbelief. "Does this not cause you pain?" asked. Shore admitted, "That is the point." Documented this observation with trembling limbs. Humans deliberately caused themselves pain for entertainment. Then he learned about alcohol. Ethanol was a poison. This was a simple fact known across the galaxy. It damaged cells, impaired cognitive function, and could cause death in sufficient quantities. Humans knew this. Their scientists had documented its effects thoroughly. They drank it anyway. They drank it at celebrations. They drank it when sad. They drank it with meals and with friends and sometimes alone in the dark. They called it recreation. They called it relaxation. They had built entire industries around the production and consumption of poison. Maria Santos, a marine biologist working at the research facility, helped understand other aspects of human biology. She was a woman in her late 20s with curly black hair and an enthusiasm for her work that found both admirable and terrifying. She explained the human immune system. Every human, Maria told him, carried billions of microorganisms inside their bodies. Bacteria lived in their digestive systems, on their skin, in their mouths. These tiny creatures were not parasites. They were partners. Humans needed them to survive. Felt dizzy. "You are telling me that humans are host to billions of organisms." "More than that," Maria said cheerfully. "We have more bacterial cells in our bodies than human cells. We are basically walking ecosystems." Had to sit down. The implications were staggering. Humans were not individual organisms. They were communities of life forms working together in ways that should have been impossible. They were hosts to creatures that would be classified as biohazards on any conquered world. And then Maria told him about human healing. Witnessed a young girl fall from a tree near the facility. She landed badly, and the crack of breaking bone was audible across the yard. The child screamed and cried and expected a medical emergency. He expected surgery. He expected permanent damage. Instead, human doctors wrapped the arm in a rigid casing and sent the child home. 6 weeks later, saw the same child running through the facility grounds. Her arm was completely healed. "Human bones regrow," Maria explained when he asked. "Actually, our entire skeleton is constantly breaking down and rebuilding itself. Every 7 years or so, you have basically a whole new skeleton." Could not process this information. He had studied biology his entire life. He had never encountered anything like this. Humans were not simply tough. They were regenerating. They were rebuilding themselves from the inside out. He spent 3 more months on Earth, documenting everything he could. He interviewed soldiers who had survived wounds that should have killed them. He met athletes who deliberately pushed their bodies past breaking points for entertainment. He observed humans climbing mountains, diving into oceans, and running distances that would destroy any other species. When it was time to write his report, sat alone in his quarters for a long time. He had come to Earth expecting to document another aggressive predator species. He had found something far worse. His report to the Galactic Concord was detailed and thorough. It included thousands of pages of observations, measurements, and analysis. But his conclusion was simple. "Earth is not a death world," he wrote. Death worlds create species that survive through adaptation to specific dangers. Earth is different. Earth has every danger: heat and cold, predators and parasites, poisons and pathogens, and humans thrive in all of it. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Earth is not a world that produces survivors. Earth is a factory that produces apex predators. Humans are not victims of their environment. They are its masters. They eat poison for pleasure. They heal from wounds that would kill us. They carry armies of microorganisms inside their bodies and call it normal. He submitted the report and waited for the Concord's response. 3 days later, he received new orders. The Concord had decided to upgrade Earth's classification. It was no longer a Class 7 death world. It was now listed as Class Unknown, approach not recommended. Thought this was an improvement, but he suspected it still was not enough. The Dominion did not believe the reports coming from the Galactic Concord. They read about bees killing diplomats and humans eating poison, and they laughed. They were conquerors. They were a reptilian species with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. They had subjugated 30 star systems through military force. They had crushed species far more advanced than these primitive Earth creatures. When they learned about Earth's resources, its water and minerals and strategic location, they saw an opportunity. The Conquered was afraid of humans. They were not afraid of anything. Admiral led the invasion fleet. He was old with dark green scales from decades of warfare. He commanded 50 warships, each carrying thousands of soldiers. He expected the conquest of Earth to take no more than a week. The fleet arrived in Earth's orbit on a cold morning in January. Admiral broadcast a message to the planet below, demanding immediate surrender. He gave the humans 1 hour to respond. The response came from a human military officer named Christopher Lane. He was a commander at a place called Space Force Base, a man in his early 40s with gray at his temples and calm eyes that had seen things they could not imagine. His message was short. No. Admiral was amused. He ordered the invasion to begin. Troops landed in major cities across the planet. They expected chaos. They expected civilians running in terror and military forces crumbling under superior firepower. They had conquered dozens of worlds this way. The pattern was always the same. Earth did not follow the pattern. In New York, a woman named Cole organized resistance within hours of the invasion. She was 51 years old, a former teacher with no military training. But she understood people. She understood how to bring them together. Within a day, she had created networks of civilians working together to move supplies, share information, and help each other survive. The humans did not wait to be rescued. They rescued themselves. Ground forces discovered very quickly that humans did not fight like other species. They did not form lines of battle. They did not engage in open combat where advantages in strength and armor would matter. Instead, they fought from shadows. They attacked from buildings, from tunnels, from places they could not reach. And they used their planet against the invaders. One commander led his unit into a region the humans called Florida. The land was wet and green, filled with vegetation and water. It seemed peaceful. Within 3 days, half his soldiers were dead. They were not killed by human weapons. They were killed by Earth. Insects swarmed the troops, biting and stinging through gaps in their armor. The bites became infected with bacteria that immune systems could not fight. Soldiers who drank the local water fell ill with parasites that ate them from the inside. One patrol was attacked by a creature the humans called an alligator, a massive predator that lived in the swamps and waited for prey to wander too close. In other regions, the story was the same. Troops in the mountains suffered from something called altitude sickness. Their bodies could not function in the thin air. Troops in the deserts died from heat and dehydration. Troops in the northern regions froze when their equipment failed in temperatures no had ever experienced. And everywhere the humans kept fighting. Private First Class Mason was stationed in a city called Denver when they attacked. He was 23 years old, young by human standards, with a quiet manner and steady hands. When they came, did not run. The battle lasted for 6 hours, took 7 plasma burns during the fighting. Each wound would have killed a soldier instantly. Kept fighting. He killed 11 warriors before the battle ended, moving through the streets with blood soaking through his uniform and pain screaming through every nerve. When the medics finally reached him, he was still breathing. He was still conscious. He asked if they had won. The medics saved his life. 3 months later was back on active duty. Admiral watched the reports coming from the surface with growing horror. His soldiers were dying in ways he had never seen. They were being killed by insects, by weather, by plants that caused painful rashes when touched. And when they actually engaged human forces in combat, they faced warriors who did not stop when wounded, who did not retreat when outnumbered, who fought with a ferocity that seemed almost insane. He sent more troops. He called for reinforcements. He ordered orbital bombardments of resistance positions. Nothing worked. The humans adapted to everything he threw at them. When he destroyed their communication networks, they built new ones. When he cut off their supply lines, they found other ways to move resources. When he thought he had crushed resistance in one area, fighters appeared in another. 6 weeks after the invasion began, Admiral made a decision that had never occurred to him before landing on Earth. He ordered a retreat. His message to the Dominion High Command was brief and bitter. He had lost nearly half his invasion force. He had failed to secure any major objectives. He had been defeated by a species with inferior technology on a planet that seemed designed to kill anything that was not human. His recommendation was simple: do not engage Earth, do not approach Earth, forget Earth exists. The Dominion High Command accepted his recommendation. The fleet left Earth's orbit and never returned. Commander Christopher Lane watched the alien ships disappear from his screens. He felt no triumph. He felt only exhaustion and grief for the soldiers and civilians who had died in the fighting. But there was also something else: a quiet satisfaction in knowing that humanity had faced an enemy from the stars and had not broken. Across the planet, people emerged from shelters and ruins. They began rebuilding immediately. They buried their dead. They treated their wounded. They cleaned up the destruction they had left behind. And they looked up at the sky with new eyes. Earth had been invaded, and Earth had won. The galaxy would remember that. Every species that heard the story would think twice before threatening humanity again. Cole returned to teaching after the war. She never considered herself a hero. She had simply done what needed to be done. Mason received medals he never wore. He went back to work because that was what humans did. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Galactic Concord received reports of the failed invasion. They added new warnings to Earth's file. Hostile planet, hostile population, do not engage under any circumstances. The council members read the reports and felt something they rarely experienced: fear. The news of the defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had never heard of Earth suddenly knew its name. They knew about the planet that had broken an invasion fleet. They knew about the creatures who ate poison and healed from wounds that should have killed them. They knew about humans. The Galactic Concord could no longer ignore humanity. For centuries, they had been content to leave Earth alone, marking it as dangerous and moving on. Now they faced a choice. They could make humans their allies, or they could risk making them enemies. Ambassador returned to Earth with a new mission. He was older now, his translucent skin showing signs of age, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He came with an invitation. The Concord wanted humanity to send a diplomatic mission to their capital station. They wanted to discuss terms of membership. The human governments debated for months. Some argued that joining the Concord would mean following alien rules. Others pointed out that humanity now knew they were not alone in the universe, and isolation was no longer an option. In the end, they agreed to send a delegation. Captain Harper was chosen to lead the mission. She was 38 years old, a former Navy pilot who had earned degrees in linguistics and international relations. She had a calm presence and a sharp mind. More importantly, she understood that this mission was not just about diplomacy. It was about showing the galaxy what humanity could do. Her crew numbered 20. They came from every continent on Earth, representing humanity's diversity. There were scientists and soldiers, diplomats and specialists. Each had been chosen for their skills and their ability to remain calm under pressure. The journey to Concord Station took 3 months. A ship transported the human delegation, and during that time, the aliens got their first extended look at human behavior. What they saw disturbed them deeply. The humans exercised constantly. Every day, crew members gathered in the cargo bay to run, lift heavy objects, and push their bodies to exhaustion. The escorts watched in confusion as humans deliberately made themselves tired and sore for no apparent reason. Lieutenant Benjamin Price, the mission's security chief, organized sparring sessions. Humans would fight each other with their bare hands, striking and grappling until one submitted. Sometimes blood was drawn. Afterward, they would laugh and help each other up. An officer finally asked Benjamin about this behavior. "It is training," Benjamin explained. "It keeps us sharp." "You damage yourselves deliberately," the officer said. "Only a little," Benjamin replied with a smile. The officer found this answer deeply unsettling. They also observed human eating habits. The delegation had brought their own food supplies, and they watched in horror as humans consumed substances that registered as toxic on their scanners. Caffeine, capsaicin, alcohol. The humans ingested these things casually, as if poisoning themselves was perfectly normal. Dr. Sandra Wells, the mission's medical officer, tried to explain. She was 53 years old with gray hair and kind eyes, a woman who had spent 20 years working in emergency rooms where she had seen every injury and illness humans could suffer. "Our bodies can handle these things," she told them. "We have adapted to process many substances that would harm other species. It is just part of being human." They did not find this comforting. When the delegation finally arrived at Concord Station, they found themselves at the center of galactic attention. The station was enormous, a structure that orbited a dead star and housed representatives from hundreds of species. Every one of those species had heard about Earth. Many came to observe the humans firsthand. Most kept their distance. They watched from afar, whispering to each other about the creatures from the death world. Some approached cautiously, introducing themselves and asking careful questions. A few decided to test human capabilities. A warrior challenged Dr. Sandra Wells to a contest of endurance. There were large beings with thick hides and great physical strength. They prided themselves on their ability to withstand pain and hardship. The warrior expected an easy victory over the aging human female. The contest involved holding a stress position until one participant collapsed. It was simple and brutal, a test of pure endurance. The warrior lasted 4 hours. It was a new record for his species. His muscles trembled and his body shook, but he held the position with fierce determination. When he finally collapsed, his fellow cheered his accomplishment. Sandra Wells lasted 9 hours. When she finally stood up, she stretched casually as if she had merely been sitting in an uncomfortable chair. She asked if anyone else wanted to try. No one did. The Concord's ruling council met to discuss humanity's application for membership. The debate was short. Every species had seen the reports from Earth. They had watched the endurance contest. They had observed human behavior on the journey to the station. The vote was nearly unanimous. Humanity was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Concord. Captain Harper accepted graciously. She stood before the assembled representatives of hundreds of worlds and spoke with quiet confidence. "We look forward to working together," she said. "Earth has so much to share with the galaxy. We bring our knowledge, our creativity, and our determination. We hope to learn from all of you as well." Her words were diplomatic and warm. Her smile was pleasant and sincere. Several council members found that smile deeply unsettling. There was something in Harper's eyes that reminded them of predators they had encountered on dangerous worlds. A quiet certainty, a patient hunger, the look of a creature that had never known what it meant to be prey. Ambassador watched the ceremony from his seat among the delegation. He had spent years trying to understand humans. He had witnessed their kindness and their cruelty, their creativity and their destruction. He still did not fully understand them. But he understood one thing clearly. The galaxy had just invited something into its midst that it could not control. Humanity was now part of the conquered, bound by its rules and traditions. Yet somehow, suspected that it would be the conquered that changed to accommodate humanity, not the other way around. He looked at Captain Harper as she shook hands with council members and posed for ceremonial images. She seemed so normal, so friendly, so harmless. Knew better. He had seen what humans could do. He had seen them survive bee stings that killed his people. He had seen them fight off an invasion fleet with inferior technology. He had watched a 53-year-old doctor outlast the finest warrior that could produce. The galaxy thought it was welcoming humanity into its community. In truth, suspected, humanity was welcoming the galaxy into theirs. And the galaxy was not ready for what that meant. 50 years passed after humanity joined the galactic conquered. In that time, humans spread across known space like water finding cracks in stone. They went everywhere. They did everything. They became the most adaptable species the galaxy had ever seen. Human soldiers served on border stations in regions too dangerous for other species. Human doctors developed treatments for diseases that had plagued alien worlds for centuries. Human engineers built structures in environments that would have killed any other builders. Human explorers mapped regions of space that no one else dared enter. And still, the galaxy did not fully understand what humanity was. Doctor dedicated his life to answering that question. He was born on Earth but raised among the stars. He spent 40 years studying alien ecosystems, comparing them to the world of his birth. He published hundreds of papers. He won every award the conquered scientific community could offer, but his most important work came at the end of his career. The Conquered Scientific Assembly gathered once every decade to discuss the greatest questions facing galactic civilization. Was invited to speak about a topic that had confused and frightened the galaxy since first contact. What are humans and why are they like this? Stood before an audience of thousands. Representatives from every major species in the conquered watched him through screens across known space. He was 73 years old, thin and gray, but his voice was strong and clear. "I have spent my entire career trying to answer the question you all have been asking," he began. "Why are humans different? Why do we survive things that kill other species? Why do we eat poison and heal from wounds and keep fighting when any reasonable creature would stop?" He paused, looking out at the assembled aliens. "The answer is simpler than you might think. But first, you need to understand what a death world truly is." He activated a display showing various planets the conquered had classified as dangerous. Worlds with crushing gravity, worlds with toxic atmospheres, worlds with extreme temperatures or aggressive predators. A death world is a planet that is hostile to life, explained. Species that evolve on death worlds adapt to survive specific challenges. High gravity produces strong bodies. Toxic air produces resistant lungs. Extreme cold produces thick insulation. Each death world creates specialists, creatures perfectly suited to one type of danger. He changed the display to show Earth. The blue planet hung in the darkness of space, beautiful and deadly. Earth is not like these worlds, continued. Earth is not hostile to life. Earth is the opposite. Earth is so hospitable to life that everything on our planet is fighting for survival every single moment. He showed images of Earth's ecosystems. Jungles filled with predators hunting other predators. Oceans teeming with creatures that consumed everything they could catch. Microscopic organisms that could kill creatures millions of times their size. Other death worlds have one or two major threats, said. Earth has all of them: heat and cold, predators and parasites, poisons and pathogens, floods and droughts and fires and earthquakes. Every environment on Earth is trying to kill everything in it, and every creature on Earth is trying to kill everything else. The assembly was silent. Every eye and sensor was focused on the human scientist. Our ancestors did not survive by being the strongest. They did not survive by being the fastest. They survived by being the most adaptable. They learned to handle every threat Earth could produce. They became generalists in a world of specialists. He showed images of early humans. Small creatures with no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. Creatures that should have been prey. These are our ancestors, said. They had no armor. They had no venom. They could not run faster than predators or fight them with natural weapons. By every standard the galaxy uses to measure survival potential, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago. He smiled, and several aliens in the audience felt a chill. Instead, they became the dominant species on the deadliest planet in known space. They did this by doing something no other species has ever done. They refused to specialize. They refused to accept limitations. Every time Earth tried to kill them, they found a new way to survive. Paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. You classified Earth as a death world because you saw a planet full of dangers, but you missed the truth. Earth is not a world where things die. Earth is a world where things learn to live despite everything trying to kill them. Ambassador, now elderly and serving his final term as representative, spoke from his seat. Then what are humans? What classification fits your species? Turned to face the old ambassador. They had met many times over the years. They had become something like friends, but knew that even who had spent decades studying humanity did not fully understand. We are not the product of a death world, ambassador. We are the product of a world that turned death into a teacher. He looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. Every species in this room evolved to survive something. You adapted to your environments. You found your niches. You became perfectly suited to your worlds. Humans did something different. We adapted to adapt. We evolved to overcome any obstacle, not just the ones our ancestors faced. When we encounter something new, something dangerous, something that should kill us, we do not die. We learn, we grow, we become stronger. He stepped forward, his voice rising with quiet intensity. Death worlds create species that can endure. Earth created a species that refuses to accept that survival has limits. The assembly remained silent, as gathered himself for his conclusion. You feared what Earth might produce. You should have asked what Earth was training us to become. The answer is simple. We are the children of a world that never stopped testing us, and we never stopped passing those tests. He looked around the room one final time. That is why your classifications failed. You were measuring the wrong thing entirely. You measured how dangerous our world was. You should have measured what it was teaching us to become. Step back from the podium. The assembly erupted in discussion. Species that had feared humanity now understood that fear in a new way. Species that had dismissed humans as merely tough now saw them as something far more significant. Ambassador sat quietly through the chaos. He was thinking about everything he had witnessed since landing in that Kansas field so many decades ago. The bee sting that killed, the soldiers who kept fighting despite wounds that should have stopped them, The doctor who outlasted a warrior. He finally understood. Humans were not survivors. Survivors endured. Survivors held on until the danger passed. Humans were something else entirely. They were the species that looked at death and saw an opportunity to become stronger. They were the species that welcomed challenges because challenges made them better. They were the species that would never stop growing, never stop adapting, never stop reaching for more. 300 years later, humanity had become the backbone of the galactic conquered. They protected its borders. They pushed its boundaries. They went places no other species would go and did things no other species would try. And on Earth, children still played in fields full of biting insects. They climbed trees that could break their bones. They swam in oceans full of predators. They grew up on a world that had never stopped trying to kill them. The galaxy had learned to accept humanity. They had even learned to appreciate them. But they never stopped being just a little bit afraid. Because every species in the conquered understood the truth that Doctor had spoken all those years ago. Humans were not survivors of a death world. They were something far more terrifying. They were the species that had turned death into a stepping stone. And they were only getting started.